I feel cursed to be coming so late in the program because I am in furious agreement with just about every paper I've heard so far. So I hope I can add some small little angle of view. With Barley Patch as my guide, I want to think about two questions. What does it mean to write fiction by following the stream system? And second, if I break the stream system into component parts, can I adequately explain the sorts of feelings engendered in me as a reader by the fiction of Gerald Murnane? So I want to start with Murnane's 1988 talk, subsequently published under the title Stream System, which begins as follows, and I can't resist reading this out. This morning, in order to reach the place where I am now, I went a little out of my way. I took the shortest route from my house to the place that you people probably know as South Entry. That is to say, I walked from the front gate of my house due west and downhill to Salt Creek, then uphill and still due west from Salt Creek to the watershed between Salt Creek and a nameless creek that runs into Dearborn Creek. When I reached the high ground that drains into the nameless creek, I walked northwest until I was standing about 30 metres southeast of the place that is denoted on page 66A of edition 18 of the Melway Street Directory of Greater Melbourne by the words stream system. Now, I am no geographer, but a cheap look on the internet via Google turned up a description by geographer Miriam Hill from Jackson State University, who says that stream systems are fed by the sheet wash flowing down the topography. The total area that feeds water to a stream is called the watershed or drainage basin. The entire network of channels of all sizes that drains an area is called a stream system. Murnane's fictional world runs on systems, most notably the convergent systems of suburbia and 1950s Catholicism. I mean, I'm interested in suburbia, so this is my starting point. Suburbia is many things, a homely and evolving landscape and the built expression of settler modernity. It is a surveyed, systematised, infinitely reproducible spatial grid that is also the locus of everyday life. Together with suburbia, or nested within it, are the sublimating rituals, icons and ideologies of the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church and its education system. The hidden privacies of low-lying, homogeneous seeming labyrinthine suburbia find their counterpart in the piously lowered eyes, compliant comportment and secretly exorbitant sexual fantasies of Catholic boyhood. Balked desire is the product, therefore, of a suburban space marked by repressive mid-century Catholic culture. The narrator's faith in Catholic dogma may have evaporated long ago, but Catholic strictures remain sublimated through ritual gestures, holy figures, divine personages and other worlds. These are the barely hidden conduits for the narrator's iconophilia and his always deferred desire for empathic communion with an ideal female personage. Suburbia functions as camouflage for the narrator and as a platform for dizzying glimpses of ever-receding grasslands. Suburban and Catholic systems jointly channel the narrator's desire, shaping his perspective and orientation to place, his obsession with boundaries and his comportment. It's not just system, however, but stream system that models the interplay in Murnane's fiction between, on the one hand, the security, predictability and systematicity of system, and on the other hand, the fluidity of stream, that which runs ceaselessly downhill along variable grooves and channels, gathering energy, momentum and desire. System and stream, figures of space and time, respectively, overlap. They're unthinkable without each other. So in Barley Patch, I want to notice just a few formal elements of its stream system, but only with a view to approaching the well springs, so to speak, of readerly feelings. The narrator of Barley Patch sits at his writing desk in his room in a suburb of Melbourne. It's obvious that confinement to the unremarkable space of the suburban room is the necessary precondition for expansion inwards or outwards of multiplying vistas. His fictional scenarios, in their various layerings and nestings, take us inland to Bendigo and south to the continental edge near Warrnambool. We learn of the narrator's interest in transoceanic grasslands in New Zealand or Tasmania, places he envisages at his back as he gazes in his preferred northwesterly direction. As always in Murnane's fiction, entry to unrolling landscapes is ingeniously deferred, circumvented or sabotaged. At the same time, potential portals to landscapes or vantage points for glimpsing them proliferate in thwarted visits to the upper stories of mansions or monasteries by means of Marcel Proust or Mandrake the Magician, via lime green or emerald blue panes of stained glass in church windows, through a calendar reproduction of Lorraine's landscape with Samuel anointing David, or by means of Irish horn rosary beads. Even these glimpses are only ever anticipated. No visible landscapes extend from the room in which the narrator sits or from the desk at which he writes. It's the blank enclosure that engenders countless, infinitely unfolding, invisible landscapes. Suburban spaces hosting the narrator's childhood memory of fictional personages are also filtered through seemingly Catholic habits of mind, linked to, or perhaps even eclipsing, his desire to glimpse landscapes is the narrator's desire to approach, win over and commune with remembered but inaccessible female fictional personages, such as Huldah in Sidney Courtier Hobson's The Glass Spear. Discarding all but those elements in any given work that may assist him in his endeavours, the narrator becomes a ghostly intruder in the remembered text. He envisages enacting the role of what Michel de Certeau, in his book The Practice of Everyday Life, calls a textual poacher, operating autonomously within the margins and spaces afforded by his memory of a given text. So this logic of textual poaching extends beyond remembered works of fiction, however, to all the various systems through which the narrator navigates, including the systematic perversion of the Catholic system. In part 2 of Barley Patch, for example, the narrator reports how the chief character of his formerly abandoned work of fiction speculatively participates in a black mass, orgies and pornography. Yet his desires swiftly pass on beyond such obvious scenes towards the infinitely unfolding turf of his imagined model racecourse. The main element of the stream system that guides the reader through the metafictive labyrinth that is Barley Patch is the rigorously crafted Murnanean sentence. But insofar as each sentence flows into the next, in succession, sentences also form the very labyrinth through which the reader travels. So sentences are a spatialised plane, concisely controlled and endlessly branching, flowing and yet channelled. They are a stream system. In turn, sentences are contoured by and carry a distinctive array of locutions. I want to turn shortly to that important set of terms that yield the most striking visual content, those images we've been talking about today, that arise both within and across individual texts. In Barley Patch, as in the other fictions, one also encounters an array of quite prosaic yet ubiquitous phrases, such as so to call, one or another, or fictional personages. One effect of these locutions is topographical. They create the grain and texture of Murnane's sentences. They also provide a certain comfort for the reader amid the branching, circuitous and looping tributaries of sentence thought. Any such sense of security, however, is rendered precarious by the cumulative force of qualifying formulae, such as the double negative or the ever-present conditional mood. Just as any watershed or stream system differs from any other in its specific and minor topographical detail, so too do minor variations in terms differentiate one Murnane text from the next. The topography of Barley Patch is characterised by phrases such as readers of goodwill, hasty readers, and readers of prowess. We also encounter two specific words that recur, becoming interlinked and then pivoting in their final usage and meaning, and those words are conception and preposterous. Much of the latter section of Part 1 concerns the narrator's attempt to conceive of the period before his own conception and to report on the courtship of his mother and father. This effort to conceive of his own conception is clearly preposterous, a word mentioned 5 times in Barley Patch. The intricacies of the narrator's scenarios in Barley Patch are indeed preposterous in the everyday sense of that which is absurd, ridiculous, or outrageous. But as the narrator himself implies, the Murnanean project is preposterous in the original Latinate sense, preposterous, which signifies inversion of the accepted order. That which should be last is put first. Murnane's fiction inverts the expected order of things within and across domains, the high and the low, the morally pure and the pornographic, reality and fiction, cosmos and heterocosmos. The last use of preposterous occurs towards the end of Barley Patch, at the culmination of a sequence in which the narrator reports what he might have said to a dream personage begging to become a character in his fiction, and in which he explains, among other things, how many a personage becomes the object of his continual curiosity, so that, quote, I longed to be on familiar terms with the personage, even if my only means of achieving this might have been the preposterous project of my becoming myself a personage in my own fiction. This expression of desire for a preposterous, preposterous position is followed a few pages later by a preposterous manoeuvre. The narrator's detailing of the preoccupations of a personage sitting among the filing cabinets produces a kind of mise en abîme in which the author-narrator does indeed become a personage in his own extended fictional system. The proliferation of metafictional scenarios in Barley Patch preposterously inverts the categorical ordering of reality and fiction. Towards the end of Barley Patch, the narrator offers to explain what previous readers of Goodwill seem to have missed in his previous fiction in a section entitled The Interior of Galdane. Galdane, we are reminded, is the fictional world of the fictional inhabitants of the fictional world of Gondal, invented by the Bronte children. In Barley Patch, the eponymous patch of barley, located on the perimeter of the narrator's childhood backyard in Bendigo, routes the narrator's metafictional world through the Brontes' Galdane. Quote, if ever I had myself written a diary entry comparable to the diary entry mentioned above, I might have written that the people of the Tamarisks were of a mind to discover the interior of the Barley Patch, unquote. Any boundary separating the real from the fictional is not just breached, but utterly confounded. These preposterous manoeuvres, furthermore, mean that little clear distinction can be sustained between the Murnanean narrator who guides us within the fiction and any other Murnanean persona we might meet in filmed interviews among steel filing cabinets. Murnane's preposterous project respatialises the seemingly divided topographies of reality and fiction, joining their separate territories into a continuous Mobius strip. More importantly, the branching tributaries of Murnane's sentence system are conduits for images. Images recur at various intervals and across changing contexts, and I think this is what I enjoyed most about your talk, Ivar. Images are gathered into clusters with a kind of rhapsodic intensity that Gaston Bachelard writes, create a sudden salience on the surface of the psyche. Bachelard's use of salience, the word salience, for the image on the surface of the psyche may be of interest. The word comes from the Latin salientum, the present participle of salire, to leap. Salience is used of pulses, beating strongly, of water jetting forth, leaping upwards, and also of animals jumping or leaping. And thus we find salient in heraldry to refer to the image of an animal with hind legs on the ground and forepaws elevated, as if in the act of leaping. Bachelard figures poetic images as surging, as both resonating without and reverberating within the psyche. At the level of the poetic image, he says, the duality of subject and object is iridescent, shimmering, unceasingly active in its inversions. Early in Barley Patch, the narrator reports how as a child he sought to look inside the doll's house that belonged to his girl cousins. He waits till night so he can peer inside uninterrupted. He considers inserting a finger to touch objects in the upper room, but is fearful of leaving a trace. The figure of intrusion gathers into a chain of images. The image of a giant eye looking in, a hand ready to grope, the narrator as ghostly intruder in fictional places, an aunt using a finger to scrape food from behind her teeth, and the finger of a priest intruding into a holy tabernacle. Many of these figures of intrusion suggest queasiness around sexual anxiety and repression, hinting at fear or guilt about penetration or abuse. Intrusion is loaded with these disturbing feelings, yet later it alters in feeling when a variant is folded into an entirely different context. Quote, I supposed I might begin to write a piece of fiction in which one of the central images was of a fern protruding through a wall of bluestone, and another central image was of a strand of hair lying across the forehead of a female person. I began to understand that a further central image was of green bunches of fronds moving underwater at unpredictable intervals. Images gather salience by means of the frequency and rhythm of their distribution in the stream system. Collected from the watershed, they are borne along on a flowing current, forming tributaries, networks and patterns, changing in value and character, so that what gradually takes hold are unnameable feelings. Across Barley Patch, beautiful images chime like bells sounding or little shards of glowing glass. From the fernery to the fern frond protruding from a bluestone wall, to blue and green fronds waving in underwater currents, or in an aquarium, to the image of a king in the lake, to the forsaken merman, to strands of hair lying across a forehead, to little birds, pheasants, plovers or chats, nesting amid the grasses. Images shimmer and reverberate. Their perpetually altering distribution, their de- and recontextualisation garners tangible energy and emotional freight. Emotion is also charged by the dynamic between retention or containment and release, by the effort of containment and its sudden relaxation. In Barley Patch, the narrator tells us that though he has read many books, he can't now recall many of their details. Now, I think the two books seem to have been written in tandem, A History of Books and Barley Patch. Concern with loss of memory informs the drive towards systems that hold and contain. Near the end of Barley Patch, the narrator details Francis Yates's book, The Art of Memory, and fleetingly gives us to understand that grassy plains, racetracks, jockey colours, swampy wetlands, ferns, birds' nests, personages in books, two-storied houses may constitute a memory palace. These images and the branches that bear them become a mnemonic system that secures the million threads of life, arresting time, decay, and mortality. Barley Patch is a memory palace, a figurative system of retention that affords infinite expansion. But it is also marked as provisional and tenuous. There are distinct moments when the metafictional apparatus wavers and the tenor of Murnane's prose shifts. For instance, there's a sequence that reports on the relations between the narrator and his youngest uncle. This is prefaced by two alternate reading scenarios, which is one of the things in Barley Patch that happens several times. The first scenario emphasises the integrity of the fictional world, blocking any notion that reported images, personages or scenes have anything to do with the real world. This scenario is designed for readers of prowess. The second scenario, we are warned, is for the sake of those readers whose prowess I could never admire, who imagine the narrator is no fictional personage but a mere human person hardly different from themselves. This scenario temporarily suspends the narrative's metafictional apparatus, prefacing an extended sequence about the narrator's long estrangement from his uncle due to the latter's disgust at the narrator's first two published works of fiction. As this sequence culminates, the usual Murnanean locutions, the double negatives, the conditional tense, all quietly drop away. The prose becomes graceful and simple. Here the narrator recounts his visit to the hospital bedside of his long-estranged youngest uncle who is dying an early death from cancer. For most of the visit, they speak in their previously habitual manner, referring only in coded terms to what occasioned the rift. Quote, "We were still outwardly cheerful as I prepared to leave, although we both surely knew that we would never meet again in the place that is sometimes called this world, as though to suggest that at least one other world may exist. When we came to shake hands, my youngest uncle thanked me for what he called my wonderful companionship during our earlier years together. I was so surprised that I was able to grasp his hand and to look him in the eye and then to stride to the door of his room and for some little distance along the corridor of the hospital before I began to weep. It would be preposterous to suggest that the feelings that arise in me as I read these pages are evidence that I am a reader who lacks prowess. For the power of this scene derives in some measure from the temporary relaxation of the narrator's normally vigilant exercise of mental prowess. Indeed, the reader remains confident that the usual mode of labyrinthine cogitation will shortly be resumed. Emotion attaches to things only partly hidden in the stream system, barely noted yet palpably there. These are the most human things: primal memory, mortality and love. Camouflaged in the prose, they are not unlike those striped quail chicks in ankle-high grass that are only visible at the moment they run toward the sound of the calling mother bird. The observations I've been making with the help of Barley Patch about containment and release of emotion are by no means separable from the emotions that gather around the images of wells, fronds of fern, strands of hair, and a barley patch with its own Bronte-esque interior universe. Similar moments recur everywhere in Murnane's fiction, not least in the stream system talk itself, in which we sense the regret of the narrator over his long turning away from a difficult brother, or that closing moment of Something for the Pain, which gives us the unspoken love of the jockey for his horse. These moments are salient images. They jet forth, taking us by surprise, delivering their charge as the sudden leaping release of pent-up feeling. But all along they are born, distributed and generated by the stream system itself, which in turn comprises those intricately proliferating metafictional topographies through which we navigate whenever we find ourselves inside Murnane's fictional worlds. Thank you.